As a FEMA instructor, I've previewed more than 50 websites for my subscribers and students, and I found out they keep making this exact same mistake I made when I was starting out in using FEMA for the very first time, which is dealing with responsiveness. So the design looks good on the desktop, but the moment you scale the site down into other breakpoints, it's a total different design. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you the fundamentals on how you can set up your frame for a responsive design. If you understand just this one mistake that 98% of designers are making, I trust you'll be a framer pro in no time. I'm not joking. So save yourself some time, because it really took me some time before I could realize on how to set up a frame for a responsive design. Hi there, my name is Praise. You're welcome back to my channel, and let's get started. Here in Framer, the first thing to set out are breakpoints, because if you design on this desktop, let's hit out a frame and you preview this desktop, how are you going to make sure that all that breakpoints are fine? As we all know, designs are viewed from different devices. Take for example, you viewing this tutorial right now. Some are viewing it from a mobile, some are viewing it from a desktop, and even some are viewing it from a tablet. So same way, we are going to be adding other breakpoints to start our responsive journey. So you click this little plus here, select tablet, then select the plus again to select that for the mobile phone. Now we have 3 breakpoints. When we preview this and we are trying to reduce the viewport, we can now see what other breakpoint holds. And if we decide that we want to make changes to the individual breakpoint, we can go ahead to do that. Let's just reduce the size of this, bring it into the frame. You will notice that the changes is only applicable to the mobile device or to the mobile breakpoint. But if we decide to change things from the desktop, let's just increase the size just like this. You see everything nicely adopt to all that breakpoint here. Now you have understood that breakpoint is the first thing to set out when designing a new project. Let's move on into the second aspect that I'm really interested in. This is where 98% of Framer beginners are getting wrong, because even me, when I was starting out in using Framer, I made this exact same mistake. So that's why I'm making this video, so you don't have to waste hours and time in trying to find out where you got it wrong. So let's use this frame for example. By default, when you bring out a frame in Framer, on the properties menu, the type here is set to absolute. So what is absolute position? Absolute position gives you this access to place your element anywhere freeform on the design canvas, which is also good. But if you are aiming to create a very responsive design, you should limit the way you use absolute position. I know that sounds somehow to your hearing, because when you open Framer for the first time, the first thing that meets you is a default absolute position. So it gives you this free access that you can just use absolute position to structure everything on your design. It's very sweet when you are just using absolute position to place your design element anywhere on the design canvas. But the place where you meet the greatest problem is when you want to make your design responsive. That is when you have to spend days in trying to restructure your design. Let me just do a quick rundown on this absolute position. Though this is not our focus for this course, but I just like giving you things down to the basics. On the properties panel, on the absolute, you will notice these points here, they are called pins. So what are pins? Let me just use this example to explain everything for you here. On this canvas, we can say that the distance from this frame to the top of the desktop is like 200 pixels, or the distance from this frame here to the bottom of the desktop is like 400 pixels, or the distance from this frame here to the left hand side is like 100 pixels. All these values I mentioned here, they are all facts. But if you really want to know the distances between the exact position of your frame in absolute position, these pins right here will guide you through everything. So we can say that the distance from this frame here to the top value is 245 pixels. And if you notice, you see this blue line. It's nothing here that the toggle here is switched on. That is why you can see these dotted lines connecting it to the top of the frame. So same thing for the right and the bottom, they are not activated. It's only when we click it that it turns to the active form of it. So by setting this, you can now see these dotted lines connecting it to the right hand side. So this is basically everything absolute position does. So like I've been mentioning when I said you should limit the way you use absolute position, what do I really mean? Why did I say this? Let's take this example so you can really understand why I said you should limit the way you use absolute position if you want to create a responsive design. So hit T on your keyboard. Let's bring out a text. Let's write out something like, let's create a responsive layout. Let's bring out the color to white, and for the size, let's increase it to like let's go 40 pixels. So let's take, for example, this is a text on our hero section and we want to introduce a button. Good and fine, I already have one here. I will just drag it into our design. So let's place it vertically. So we have our button and our text, and you might think this is the right way to structure things when you are designing. Let me bust your bubbles. For example, we want to introduce a subtext, meaning that each time we want to introduce a new element, we have to make space for that particular element to enter. I have to shift this button down here, then copy this text for the subtext to enter. And each time we want to add another subtext, I have to come down here to shift the button like this for another subtext to enter. And not just that, what if we want to change the direction of our text? Let's just raise this down like this. So in some cases, we might have text that we want to fold in into two lines. But with this particular setting, we now have to come down, pick the three last option so we can make space for that kind of effect. So all these shifting elements, resizing here and there, trying to see spacing that will fit into the new element, the stress is not just worth it. Rather, there's a new, updated, and more advanced way to do this without going through this long process. Because if you have been using absolute position and thinking that is the easy way out, you're literally wasting more time using absolute position. So let me quickly show you the best way to set up your desktop for a responsive design without going through all this stress. So like I've mentioned, we have other resizing option. I've already talked about absolute. Absolute gives you the ability to place your element anywhere on the design canvas. We also have other resizing option like relative. It's a type of position where the behavior of the primary frame is dependent on the main frame or main stack. While fixed is a type of position that allows the frame to be dependent on the viewport. This type of position is mostly used when you are trying to fix your top navigation or your footer in your design. The last one here, which is sticky, is a type of position where the layer in view switches from relative to fixed and from fixed back to relative when it reaches the end of the viewport. All this I just said may sound really confusing, maybe for those who are just starting out in using Framer for the very first time. But the good news here is I have a video that will explain everything about Framer, about all the elements, about starting out in creating your design from a blank canvas. So you can do well to check my channel for that specific video. So like I've said, if you want to create a responsive design, you should limit the way you use absolute position to avoid this kind of thing here. But since I've been mentioning, do not use absolute, what then are we supposed to use? So let me use this new example to show you guys how you can go about this, because the only way you will learn this thing perfectly is when I've showed you guys repeatedly on how you can set up your desktop for a responsive site. I'll be bringing out two frames here, so F1 here and the F. Let me just copy this. So this frame here is the first thing you see when you open a new project. It's literally the same thing as this desktop. So for this second one, I'll be turning it into a stack. So if you want to create a responsive design, you have to make use of stack. So what's a stack? A stack is a frame. It's still a frame, but the only difference that separates it from a frame is just the extra added features attached to it. So to set up a stack, you go to the properties, click this layout, this plus here. This automatically turns it into a stack. So on this plate, you can now see this one is a frame and this one is a stack. So what's the difference between a frame and a stack? You F out a frame. That sounds funny. So you bring out a frame. So like I've already shown you, the default on every frame is set to absolute, which gives you the ability to turn it anywhere on the design canvas. We have already dealt with this particular example, but let's focus on a stack. What happens when we bring out a frame in a stack? So F on your keyboard, bring out a frame here. You will notice one thing. If I'm trying to like bring out the frame to fit into this particular position, the moment I leave my trackpad, everything returns back to the same position. So if you remember what I said about relative position, let me just recap everything. So I was saying that relative position is a type of position that the behavior of the primary frame is dependent on the main stack or the main frame. So by dragging this to this place, it's not going to take that position because That is not the behavior. We don't have the ability to control the primary frame that is inside it. We can only control that from the main stack. So do you get what I was trying to say when I brought about relative position? Because if we select this frame, go to the properties here, you will notice one thing, that the type automatically changed to relative. So this is just saying that without stack, we can't use relative, and without relative, we can activate a stack. It's just that way it works. So on the main stack, we have to go to the properties menu to align things out if we want to control the behavior of the primary frame. On the layout option here, when we click the main stack, you will see this whole layers here dedicated for stack. So on the stack option, we have the access to switch it from a vertical part to a horizontal part. You won't see anything that works here because we have not added other elements. But if we choose to like duplicate this, D, Ctrl D and Ctrl D, by selecting the main stack, going down to the properties and changing the direction to vertical, you will notice one thing. The part of the frames inside is switched to a vertical part. And if you choose to return it back to horizontal, we can just do this right here. On the distribute, you will see that it's set to center. This is what makes the frames inside it to remain at this center position. And if we want it to stick to the top, we can change it from center to start, but it doesn't end there. We have to also align it to the top. So you can now see it's way easier to align things using a stack than positioning things from an absolute aspect. So let's change it back to center because I have a whole lot to show you. This was set to center here. Next up, if we want to increase the gap between this element here, we can all do this from the layout option. So you now remember when we were structuring things using absolute position, when we were shifting layers for another layer to enter. But by using a stack, everything nicely adopts and you don't really have to stress yourself or changing things on the canvas because you can just do things from the properties menu and it will adopt nicely. So by setting a frame to a stack, we can now know the exact position of the gapping between each element. Because when we're using absolute, we're not sure of the spacing system we were using. But by setting a stack, it gives you that leverage to know the exact figure of the gapping system on your design. We can also choose to add a top value or a top padding to it. Let's just go with a top padding of 100 pixels. You might not notice the difference because the frames inside the stack is kind of too much and we can't see the full length of the frames. So talking about responsiveness, let me delete all these frames. I just want to use one to show you this example. When you want to create a responsive design, let me now show you why it is very important to use a stack in this case. So let's just say we want this frame to fill the width of the frame, the main frame I'm saying. So we have to manually come to change it like this so it can be able to fill the full width of the frame. But let's just say we want to scale our design or our frame into other breakpoints and we are going with a desktop breakpoint, meaning that we have to increase the frame just like this. But you will notice one thing, the frame inside it is in a fixed position. But what we wanted is that no matter how we increase the viewport, the frame inside it is going to adopt and is going to be responsive to the width or height of how we increase it to. But on a normal frame, we have to come manually again, set this to fill here, just make it to fill this place. This is all stress, but by setting a frame to a stack, all we have to do is to select the frame inside it, set it to fill width on the properties here, and that's just good to go. So whenever we increase the width of the frame to any length, is just going to be responsive, like it's just going to be responsive. So you can now see multiple reasons why I said you should reduce the way you use absolute and consider using stack. After walking through the basic fundamentals of how a responsive design works, let's now set up our desktop the right way. I'll be selecting this, select out all the stuffs we're doing right there. I've already told you that to create a responsive design, we have to utilize stack. So I'll be selecting the desktop or the frame and go to the properties and add a stack. On the properties menu, you will see is notifying you here that this stack is in a vertical position. That is why you have this vertical line on this icon. If we were to change the direction on the properties menu to horizontal, if we go back to the layers panel, you will see here that the part is now on a horizontal part. So if you are creating a design, we want the layers or the sections to fall under each other because it's not going to work. Our design elements are not going to work if the direction of the main desktop is set to horizontal. because it's just going to be lining up side by side. But we want a scenario where all the elements or sections will fall under each other. So by doing that, I will change this back to vertical. After turning the desktop into a stack, it doesn't end there because there are other design elements that we want to add. But what really separates them apart is grouping each section. So let's assume we want to start from the hero section. Like I said, we'll be dividing all our elements to their like terms. So all the elements you want to use on your hero section should be in a specific stack. So I'll F out, I'll bring out a frame just like this. But if you preview this, you will notice that the frame inside it is not filling the width of the desktop. It only becomes responsive if we reduce the viewport into other breakpoint. But anything bigger than that, it's not responsive. Because if we don't set up this stuff the right way, when we have a larger screen or a larger viewport, it's not going to be responsive. So to make this frame responsive to the desktop, one thing should be ringing in your mind: stack, right? So we are going to change this frame into a stack, go to the properties and change that into a stack. But it doesn't end there. We have to set the frame or the stack now to fill width. So go down up to the properties on the width panel, change it from fixed to fill width, and you'll see it to nicely fill the width of the desktop. So when we preview this one more time, we don't have any lapses. So if we should reduce the viewport or increase it, everything becomes responsive. So by setting up this frame like this, even if we have a width that is larger than the width of my present desktop, it's going to nicely adopt. So if you are creating a section that will contain all the elements in the hero section, we are not going to be using the color. So you change this, go down to the properties and remove the fill color, so that whatever element you are going to be adding to the frame, we don't have that color to deal with. So by setting up the stuff like this, let's fix in all this text as it's supposed to be on the hero section. So before we add this text and the button into the hero section frame or the section, one thing I like doing is to bring out another frame that will house the individual element on the hero section. I know this sounds weird, but it's optional. But if you are aiming to keep a very clean environment, you have to make sure that the right elements are grouped together. So I'll be bringing out a frame inside of the hero section, just a small frame like this, because the text is not really going to exceed this height. Before we introduce the text into this frame, let's prepare it for responsiveness, which is turning it into a stack and also setting the width to fill width. Then also you can remove the fill color because we are not going to be making use of that in this case. So I will copy this, Ctrl X and paste it here, Ctrl and V, then copy our button. Let me just do this, Ctrl X, Ctrl and V. You can see that they are both on the horizontal part. So where do we go in this case is the main stack to control the behavior of the element inside of it. So select the stack they are wrapped in, go to the properties, where is it, and change the direction from horizontal to vertical. So if we're to introduce a subtext, just like how we're using absolute, all we have to do is just to Ctrl D and Ctrl D, and you see it makes space for the element to enter. You can now see the reason why I said you should limit absolute positioning, because when we're using absolute positioning, we're just shifting our button here and there. But using a stack, you don't really have to go through those stress. So if we're to add gapping to the element of this section, you don't really have to touch the canvas because you can do that from the properties menu. But if you are used to designing and touching your canvas here and there, you can just drag out this pink line and you will still see the same gapping system you are seeing on the properties menu. If we were to wrap our text, let's just select this and let it fold into the second line. You see it's just too responsive that it creates space for literally anything. So we can also rearrange layers without shifting things out, just with the arrow key. So if I wanted our button to be in the third place, I would just have to use my arrow key to shift it up like that. Going to the responsive aspect, when we preview this design and we are trying to reduce the viewport to other breakpoints, you will see that our text is not even responsive, even when we have used stack and stack and stack almost everywhere. So how can we make this text to be responsive so that when I reduce the viewport, it is going to adapt to the width of the frame? So head back to the design. I'll be setting fill width to all these elements here. To select this fill width, Let me just select both of them and set it to view width. You see they both align to the left hand side. That is not what we want. We want it to be fixed, sorry, to be aligned at the center, not fixed. So I'll be selecting the three text, go down to the properties, go to alignment and align it to the center, and everything will just come back to the way it was. So if we preview this one more time, reduce the viewport, you see our text is now responsive. So one last example before we draw the curtain on this tutorial. So let's assume there's a section that is full of cards and we want it to be responsive. So F out a frame, this should be a usual word now, F out a frame. So drag out a frame like this, you set the width to fill width and also turn it into a stack. So just go to your layout and click the little plus to add a stack. So let's assume once again that the height of our second section is somewhere around here. But if we increase it to this point, you see the remaining part of the frame, it's not visible. This is because it's kind of hidden in the desktop frame. So to access the full height of the second section, you simply go to the main stack that is holding all the elements, which is the desktop. So you go to the properties menu of the desktop. On the height is set to fixed, so it has a fixed height of 1000 pixels. So this means that if we bring in a frame that is more than 1000 pixels, it's not going to show the full length of that frame. So to change that, we are going to change this from fixed to fit content, and we can now see the full length of the second section. So once again, we remove the fill color because it's just a section that will hold our element. So like I said, what if the section comprises of cards and want it to be responsive? So I'll be bringing out a frame to denote the card. So something like this will do. You set the width. Since you want to make it responsive, you first set the width to fill width. After setting it to fill width, we can come again and say we want to introduce more cards to the section. You don't have to worry because all you have to do is just to hit your Ctrl D and Ctrl D and let Famous Tag do the calculation for you. So by doing this, we now have cards that have the same height and width. So you don't really have to stress yourself in finding the perfect height and width that will accommodate 3 cards in the section. We can also add gapping between these cards. So select the stack wrapping the cards, go to the properties and increase the gap. Let's go with something like 49. We can also add padding to this section. So you just go down, click the second option and add a padding on the right hand side. Let's go 40 pieces. Add the padding on the right hand side, 40 pieces, and you see everything nicely adopt. Moving to the responsive aspect of optimizing it for other breakpoints, because you can see here that this frame, if it was an actual card, we can't have a card like this in our design. So we have to change the direction of the breakpoint so we can have cards that have enough breathing space to contain their element. So I'll be starting with this desktop because if these were actual cards, you see that the element inside of the cards will not have enough breathing space. So to accommodate that, we have to change the direction. To select the second section, go to the properties and change it to vertical path. And you see there's enough space to contain all the individual elements of the cards. Taking a closer look of this section, you can see the frame of this first card is kind of inside of the second section. So I'll show you how you can go through this by setting the frame or the section to fit content. So select the second section, go down to the height, change it from fixed to fit content. So that is literally everything you have to do for you to see the full content of the cards. So we're done optimizing for the tablet. Let's move on into the mobile screen. So same way, you change the direction of the section to vertical and change it also from fixed to fit content. And you see everything is perfectly responsive. So I did all this example to show you how you can use stack, structure your element, and also know how to optimize it for other breakpoints. So by previewing this, let's scroll down to that section to check the responsiveness. The moment I reduce the viewport into other breakpoint, you see how responsive everything is. So that is it for this tutorial. If you like this video, smash that like button, comment down below what you want to see next on this channel. And until next time, keep designing.